Chris Whyte is a Durban man who founded Use It, which could have a phenomenal impact on recycling in South Africa. Chris and his team operate out of a premises he built in Hammersdale, entirely from donor funding. If more people were aware of what Chris is doing, we could save thousands of tons of waste from landfill sites every year and create thousands of jobs. Chris has won 6 global awards for the work Use It has done. In this interview, I speak to Chris about the economics of recycling and the people whose lives depend on waste. Chris and other specialists have written to the government about the impact of COVID-19 on the recycling sector. It's a complex and fascinating subject.
So the problems we face is that we all go to the petrol station and we buy oil for our cars and our vehicles, but people don't realize that the container that you're using, normally what happens is that it's an HDPE bottle. It has an aluminium seal. It's got a polypropylene lid. This one, the lid's not on, but you can see the polypropylene ring around there. And then it has an LDPE or a paper coating on the outside. And then it's contaminated inside with oil or coolant or other components, other hydrocarbons. So nobody wants to recycle that. It's too expensive to recycle. The opportunity is that if we work with systems like pyrolysis, we can granulate that straight up and the whole lot can go into a pyrolysis unit and convert that into a low sulfur furnace oil or a diesel replacement. So Use It has been around officially since 2008. We started operation in 2009, so we've been at it for 11 years now. I started the whole system of putting Use It together in 2004, so it took me 5 years to get it off the ground. And again, that was just getting people to understand what it was we wanted to try and do and where did it fit in the city. And started my own company straight out of university, looking at geographic information systems, which I learnt while I was at university. And I found that I could marry my geology and my GIS because I was able to combine the two through what we call geobotanical anomalies and map geology through understanding changes in vegetation depending on the mineral content of the soils. But that really got me more into a lot of the work I was doing across Africa. I've been to over 40 African countries working with the World Bank, USAID, DFID, any aid company you mentioned, I've been with them for a while. And most of what I was seeing, although I was looking at the vegetation side, it showed me the environmental side the whole time. And so I had this massive exposure across Africa to all the different things that are happening right across Africa, realizing that a lot of those issues and components are pretty similar across Africa. We can't compare the situation we have here to what's happening in Europe or the States or even Asia. We realized that you can't look at one-way stream in isolation. And I think that's what I was seeing right across the board, is that people are looking at plastic and they focus on plastics, or they look at builder shop, or they look at organics. But you've got to look at everything and understand the intricate relationships between those. And that's really where I started thinking outside of the box in terms of looking at how these different things work together. So on the wood waste, we decided, okay, you can't just look at burning it or composting it. You can biochar it, you can convert it into a bioorganic fertilizer, you can activate it, you can put it through an anaerobic digester, you can get energy out of it, you can gasify it, you can mix it with plastic and create a different product called wood plastic composites. You can use it as a filler in building mediums, etc., etc. So it started becoming a journey, essentially, of understanding how to look at every single waste stream and understand the many, many different applications of what can happen. The recycling industry is in trouble. It's in deep trouble. It's been in trouble for a while. We've had issues where basically most of the world was exporting their wastes to mostly China, but also Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam and other places. And those doors have closed, literally since, I think it was January 2019, Operation National Sword from the Chinese government literally shut the door. So all these countries that have been recycling their waste, like the UK and America and all the rest of it, they weren't recycling it, they were exporting it to China. Now they've got a problem, they don't know what to do with this stuff. So logistic costs became a massive issue, and it's the same thing we have in South Africa. We don't have scales of economy here, so we've got to move waste from the Western Cape to Johannesburg. It doesn't make sense economically because the transport costs are too high. Or from KZN to Joburg, or from KZN to Western Cape. So again, my focus then started to be looking at small-scale applications in those areas. But the industry itself has always been looked at in terms of understanding the waste sector comprises many different things, from organic waste to sewage sludge to electronic waste, plastics, paper, cardboard, tin, glass. There's a whole host of different waste streams: old oils, lubricants, chemical waste, wastewater. And the issue in terms of the packaging waste has been problematic, with prices plummeting for the last 2 years because of the China issue. But also because we have what I would call a cherry-picking society, where we literally pick the high-value products and we leave everything else in the environment. So we're probably only collecting 40% of what should be being collected. And of that, we're only collecting 10% nationally. So 90% of our recyclables are going to landfill. Recycled plastics are going up and up and up in price. And you have a situation where the global economy is looking at moving from a fuel-based hydrocarbon type system to EV, your electric vehicles. And your OPEC countries see that demand coming down. So they're now trying to diversify what they can do with that crude in order to ensure that they keep making money. Plastics was about 6% of global oil usage. In the last 5-6 years, there's been nearly $200 billion worth of investment into plastics manufacturing, which means that plastics are going to be manufactured more and more and more, and our output is probably going to increase by 40% over the next 10 years. Move ourselves away from this naive mindset as to what recycling is. Because people perceive recycling around crafts, they perceive it around small-scale sort of stuff. It's really not a big option or an opportunity, and it's kind of done because it's the right thing to do, but people don't even understand where the waste is going and what's happening to it. We're producing 26 million tons of municipal solid waste in this country every year, 17 million tons of industrial waste from the mining sector and the power sector, probably another 26-30 million tons of agricultural waste that's going nowhere. So the problem is a lot bigger than you and I putting our bottle in our orange bag or into our source separation. And what we've got to try and do is we've got to start thinking differently. So when I talk about, I don't talk about recycling. The guys call me the recycling guy. I hate it. I'm not the recycling guy. So when I talk about the waste economy, I talk about sustainable development goals, I talk about circular economy, I talk about the opportunity in terms of creating regenerative economies. It's about looking at industrial applications and offtakes for product that creates sizable markets that can meet the waste requirements. But the opportunity is that we have a window now where we can work with private sector and the government sector to drive a new economy that underpins the value of recycling. The base of recycling is the pickers. Now, understand 90% of the waste that is collected in this country is collected by the waste pickers, the waste collectors, scavengers, people call them all sorts of things. We like to call them waste material managers, basically. The idea is that this is all going to fail if those guys don't get a value. If those guys don't get a value, it's not collected. It doesn't go to the recycling centres. Then the recycling guys collapse. So we were looking at potentially 100 to 120,000 jobs being lost in the sector, and it will take us forever to recover. The opportunity we have now is that we've been working with different industries through the PROs, producer responsibility organizations, and the likes of Plastics SA and other role players nationally, to look at the packaging industry with regard to extended producer responsibility. And we went through several iterations with past ministers, and we were looking at it with regards to what we call a Section 28 application, which was a government-led tax-based type model, which has failed in the past. So we said bag, Rhodesia, you name it, they've failed miserably. So there was a lot of resistance from industry. The new minister came in and this all came to a head in November, I think it was 2018, where we had the plastics colloquium. We started bringing the people together, understanding that there were different components of industry working together. Some people were doing great work, committing to a greener future. Others were sitting back and saying, well, that's fine, let them put up the costs and everything else. She understood the opportunity and the frustration of industry and converted. She scrapped the Section 28 and she reverted to a Section 18. Now, Section 18 is an industry-based producer responsibility type system. That really got the support of industry, because there are some great companies out there, Polyco, Petco, the Polystyrene Recycling Association, that are doing some great work in terms of driving the markets for the different recycling products. And if that was taken away and put under government, I think we were all going, okay, well, there it goes. There's essentially two different components to the picture. One is what we would call an extended producer responsibility fee, which means that every kilogram of plastic, paper, cardboard would be allocated a certain value. That value would be used to pay the waste pickers and to look at logistical costs and other things to support the collection side of the recycling industry. But if you don't have a market, you're then still in the same situation. So the second part of that is through the SA Plastics Pact. And there's some great companies, the big corporates, Unilever, Woolworths, Coca-Cola, are all part of the SA Plastics Pact. And the focus there is that they're saying we understand from an industry perspective we have a responsibility. And that responsibility is not necessarily to go out there and collect it, it's to create a market for it that allows for that collection to happen. I think the sort of nirvana we were looking for is that they take absolute responsibility. And I'm hoping we get there. And I think that there are moves afoot, because part of what we're looking at through not only the local plastic pact, but the international plastic pact, is to look at all different components. So looking at the redesign, making sure that design for recycling, so that we don't end up with packaging like the thermoformed PET you get with your woolly salad that is unrecyclable. We put it into something that is recyclable. And the reality is that that will be passed on to the consumer if it's slightly more expensive. But if you look at the cost of your packaging, as a component of the product that you're buying, it generally is a very small margin. But we need to ensure that the money comes back into the recycling market. But then also to understand that we import a huge amount of product into this country, and that we stop that at the borders, or we tax it heavily. And that's where government can play a role. If they want to tax from that side and it doesn't affect our local industry, 100%. But it's got to protect the local industry, it's got to protect the recycling industry, and it's got to create the entire value chain in terms of what we're looking at. We've got a long way to go. We're probably looking at about 10% of what can be recycled, being recycled in this country at the moment. That industry at the moment incorporates probably 47,000 people in the formal sector, and probably about 90,000 people in the informal sector. And that's based on 10%. So there's a huge opportunity in terms of taking that to the next level. If we get to 30%, 50%, 60%, each of that will have the same number of jumps in terms of what's required in the informal and the formal sector. So a lot of work was done years ago. 2017 we got together with something where industry, NPOs, civil society and government got together. Well, since we established in 2009, we have created to date about 2,600 jobs. And again, we don't employ all those people. We've created those jobs in the sectors and in the industries through innovation and projects that we've created. We've also, on top of that, probably trained another 700-800 people in different components, from building construction to the sort of things that you see here with skills development and working with waste materials to create new products. But every rand of funding that we receive, we save between 5 and 6 rand in landfill diversion fees. Now, if you take the value of plastic or paper or cardboard going into a landfill, the cost per cubic meter, which is what we work in landfill airspace, is around about 300 rand for the Durban area, 300 rand per cubic meter. So we're saving 5 to 6 times our funding already. So it's a cost negative component. Before we even look at the jobs that are created, the skills, the training, the impact on the environment, it's a multi-benefit approach. And we need to create those partnerships. Those partnerships need to be with the private sector, with the corporates who need to look at achieving their outcomes in terms of sustainability. We need to work with civil society in terms of understanding the needs from a social and environmental perspective, but we also need to work with governments who also need to create jobs and manage the waste and build infrastructure and manage the water and clean up the environment and all those things, and it all fits together.